What would you say if you had one more chance? I'm Andrea Applewick, and this is If I Could Say One More Thing, a podcast about words we carry, the conversations we replay, and the moments that quietly change everything. Each episode begins with a story inspired by a real request, a chance to revisit something unfinished, or to imagine what might have been. Because sometimes the past doesn't need to be changed, just understood. Today's story is about an ending that doesn't quite feel like one. Amanda is 55. She's been separated from her husband, Paul, for 10 years. They've built a quiet, respectful distance, raising their son, Christopher, staying connected in ways that never quite had a name. But when Paul tells her he wants a divorce, something shifts. Not because of what he says, but because of what she understands. This is a story about love after it changes shape, about what remains even when something becomes official. I've always believed that endings deserve a kind of ceremony. Not balloons or speeches. I'm not that kind of woman. But something that acknowledges the weight of what has been. A pause. A moment of recognition. The emotional equivalent of setting down a glass carefully instead of leaving it half full on the edge of a table. So when the email arrived confirming the date of my divorce, it wasn't the language that caught me. It was the date. June 14th. I read it once, then again, as if the numbers might rearrange themselves out of courtesy. They didn't. June 14th, our wedding anniversary. 30 years. Apparently, this is when it would become official. That we had once loved each other long enough to build a life, and then, just as deliberately, had learned how to live without it. I didn't expect the feeling that followed. It wasn't grief. Not exactly. Grief, in my experience, is louder. It arrives with edges, with tears that demand witnesses, with the kind of ache that makes ordinary tasks feel like small betrayals. This was quieter, more like a shift in pressure, like realizing a door you hadn't never noticed was open all these years is finally closed. Paul and I have been separated for 10 years. 10 years is a long time to not be together. And also, I've discovered, a long time to remain connected in ways that don't have names. We did it well, I think, or at least as well as anyone can. There was no dramatic fracture, no moment I can point to and say, that was when everything broke. Just a gradual softening, a series of conversations that didn't quite land where they used to, a growing awareness that the life we had built together no longer fit the people we were becoming. We have a son, Christopher, who is 25 now, fully grown, living in London, speaking 3 languages, and calling home less often than I would like, but more often than I admit. We raised him together. That part was never in question. Even after the separation, there were still birthdays, holidays negotiated with surprising ease, the occasional dinner where we sat across from each other and discussed Christopher's life like 2 colleagues who had once been something more. It never felt like an ending. It felt like a reorganization. For years, I've described Paul not as my ex, but as Christopher's father. It sounds cleaner that way, more purposeful, less final. There's a certain dignity in roles that continue even when relationships do not. And Paul had remained present. Not intimately, not in the way of shared mornings or quiet evenings or the easy choreography of a long marriage, but present in the background of my life, like a piece of furniture you no longer use, but never quite remove. Solid, familiar, unquestioned. When he told me he was getting married, it wasn't a shock. I knew about the woman, Elena, a name that sounds like sunlight and decisions made without hesitation. They've been together for a few years, long enough that it stopped feeling temporary. Still, when he said the words, "We're getting married this summer," something shifted inside me, subtle but undeniable. Not jealous, not regret, something more precise. The quiet realization that whatever undefined space had existed between us was about to be redefined without my consent. "Is that okay?" he asked, almost as an afterthought. He wasn't asking my permission. We both knew that. He was asking something else. Can we do this without breaking what we've managed to keep intact? I smiled. "Of course," I said, and I meant it. Mostly. It wasn't until the paperwork arrived that the feeling sharpened. Divorce proceedings, finalization, legal dissolution. The language was clinical in a way I found faintly offensive, as if 30 years could be reduced to a series of forms that required signatures in the right places, as if a life could be untangled by someone who had never seen us in a kitchen at 7 a.m., passing each other coffee without speaking. I sat at my kitchen table with the documents spread out in front of me. The same table where Christopher once did his homework, where Paul read the newspaper aloud in fragments, where dinners stretched into conversations that felt, at the time, infinite. I picked up a pen, then set it down again. What surprised me wasn't hesitation. It was memory. Not the big ones, not the wedding day or the birth of our son or the vacations that were photographed into permanence. It was the smaller things. The way Paul used to check the locks twice before bed, as if the world might rearrange itself overnight. The way he insisted on buying too much fruit at the market, convinced we would eat more of it than we ever did. The way we once argued, gently, almost academically, about whether happiness was something you build or something you stumble into. We never resolved that one. I realize, sitting there, that I wasn't grieving the marriage. That had happened slowly over years, in increments so small they barely registered. What I was feeling now was something else. I was grieving the version of us that had continued to exist quietly, even after everything had changed. The version that allowed me to think, we are no longer together, but we are still something. And now there will be a new wife, a new life, a new center of gravity. The thread hadn't snapped dramatically. It's simply been released. June 14th, 30 years. I find myself counting them, not in milestones, but in textures. The early years, full of ambition and badly assembled furniture. The middle years, structured around Christopher's needs, our own desires folded neatly into the margins. The later years, quieter, more reflective, when love became less about passion and more about presence. And then the last 10, which haven't been loveless, just different. I pick up the pen again. This time, I sign. My name looks the same as it always has, which feels, somehow, both reassuring and deeply unfair. That evening, I call Christopher. I signed the papers today, I say, keeping my voice steady in the way mothers do when they want to signal that everything is under control. There's a pause on the other end. Are you okay? He asks. I smile, though he can't see it. Yes, I say, and then after a moment, I think I am. Later that night, I open a bottle of wine. Not to celebrate, not to mourn, just to mark the moment. I pour a glass and stand by the window, looking up at the full moon, suspended there with a kind of quiet certainty, as if it has always known how to hold both light and shadow at once. I think about Paul, about Elena, about the life they will build together. And to my own quiet surprise, I feel something like goodwill. Not forced, not performative, real. Because the truth is, I don't want to undo what we were. I don't want to rewrite the years or pretend they meant less just because they ended. If anything, I want to protect them. To say, this mattered. This was real. And it doesn't disappear just because it changes form. I finish my wine and set the glass down carefully. Somewhere, I imagine, Paul is also moving through his evening. perhaps with a similar awareness of what has shifted, or perhaps not. People rarely experience endings in the same way. I turn off the light and stand for a moment in the quiet. There's no dramatic resolution waiting for me. No sudden clarity that will make everything feel complete. Just a simple, steady understanding. We did not fail. We lived. We built something that lasted as long as it was meant to. And now we are letting it become something else. Before going to bed, I glance at the calendar on my kitchen wall. June 14th is still circled. I haven't erased it. I'm not sure I will. Some dates, I realize, don't belong to endings or beginnings. They belong to both. And maybe that's the most honest version of love I know how to hold. Not something you keep, not something you lose, but something that stays in a different shape, quietly, steadily, still part of the life I'm learning to live. That was Amanda's story, a reflection on 30 years of love, 10 years of distance, and one quiet decision that gave it a final shape. As always, names and identifying details have been gently changed to protect the privacy of the people who trust me with these stories. But the emotions, the questions, the meaning behind them are very real. I spoke with Amanda about what it means to let something end, not because it broke, but because it became something else. Amanda, when you saw the date, June 14th, what was the very first thought that came to you?
Honestly, nothing at first. I just stared at it. It felt familiar before it felt meaningful, if that makes any sense. And then it kind of landed. And I remember thinking, of course, it's that day. Not in a dramatic way, just like something had come full circle without asking me.
Almost like the date chose the moment for you. Did it feel like an ending to you or something else?
It didn't feel like an ending. I think the ending had already happened quietly, years before. This felt more like, I just felt like acknowledging something. Like putting a name on something that had already changed.
Like the feeling caught up with the paperwork. You and Paul had been separated for 10 years. How would you describe what your relationship was during that time?
That's always the hard one. We weren't a couple, but we weren't strangers either. We were still, I guess we were still familiar. there was this ease. We knew how to talk to each other without explaining everything. And I think we both valued that.
Did it ever feel like you were still connected in a way that you didn't quite have a name?
Yeah, yes. I don't think I ever said that out loud. But yeah, there was always this quiet sense that we still belonged to the same story. Not moving forward together, but still understanding each other in a way that no one else could.
Like something was still there, even if it wasn't defined. Did that feel comforting, or did it keep you in that in between space?
Both. It was comforting because nothing felt completely lost. But I think it also meant I didn't have to fully let go of anything. I could just, stay there in something that felt gentle, even if it wasn't clear.
At some point, things began to, let's say, shift. Was there a moment when you realized that something had changed?
Yes, but not in a dramatic way. There wasn't a moment that you could point to. It was more like a shift in the background. Something became different, and I could feel it before I can actually explain it.
He did say he wanted a divorce, but it sounds like what stayed with you wasn't just what he said, it was what he didn't say.
Yeah, exactly. He did say it. He said he wanted a divorce, but he didn't say why. And I think that's what stayed with me. Because on the surface, nothing had really changed between us. I mean, we had been living like that for 10 years, and there was no urgency, no tension. So when he said it, I knew it wasn't about us anymore. It was about something else. Or someone else. I didn't need him to explain it. I knew about Elena, and I knew what they had. And I think she wanted something that had a shape to it, a name. And maybe he did too. So the divorce didn't feel like something being taken away from me. It felt like something being completed so that something else could exist.
That's a very clear kind of understanding.
I think it's just acceptance.
What did that realization change for you personally?
It made things clearer. That space I had been living in, it just disappeared. Not painfully, just naturally. And I realized I had been holding on to something that didn't really belong to the present anymore.
And after everything, how would you define love today?
I think love is less about staying than I used to believe. I thought it meant continuity, forever. Now I think it's about how you carry someone, even when you're no longer walking in the same direction. It's about respect and kindness and being able to say, this mattered without needing it to continue,
That's a very different kind of love. Do you feel like what you and Paul had still exists, just, in a different form?
Yeah. I mean, we share a history. We share Christopher. We share a vision of ourselves that only existed because we were together. That doesn't disappear. It just becomes quieter.
Is it possible to stop being partners, but not stop caring?
Yes. And in some ways, it's simpler. There's no expectation attached to it anymore. You just care. And you want the other person to be okay. And you mean it.
How did being Christopher's parents shape the way you stayed connected?
It grounded us. It reminded us that something bigger than us still existed. And we were both very aware of that. We wanted him to feel that he came from something real, not something broken. Just something that changed.
That's a beautiful distinction. Did you ever feel like you were protecting something for him?
Yeah, but not in a heavy way. More like protecting the tone of the story. Making sure that when he looks back, that he sees love, even if it didn't last the way people expected to.
If you could say one more thing, not to Paul, but about the life you shared, what would it be?
I would say I'm glad we had it. All of it. Even the parts that didn't last. Because they created something that still exists. Christopher. And also who I became.
And maybe that's what love does. It doesn't always stay, but it leaves something that does. Amanda, thank you. Some endings arrive loudly. Others quietly take their place beside everything that came before. Amanda's story reminds us that love doesn't always disappear. It evolves. It softens. It finds new ways to exist. And sometimes understanding that is enough. If this story stayed with you, you might consider following the podcast or sharing it with someone who's navigating their own version of what comes next. And if there's something you've never said, something you still carry, you can send your story to sayonemorethingpod@gmail.com. I'm Andrea Applewick, and this is If I Could Say One More Thing.